Hello and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On this week's episode, I'm speaking to Saima Mir, journalist and crime novelist, author of The Khan and sequel Vengeance. In her books, Saima introduces us to Jia Khan. A successful lawyer, her London life is a long way from the grubby northern streets she knew as a child, where her father headed up the Pakistani community and ran the local organised crime syndicate. Often his Jirga rule, the old way, was violent and bloody, but it was always justice of a kind. In her books, Saima explores morality, humanity, family, kinship, community, patriarchy, and the unfair expectations placed on women. She explores what people are forced to do to survive and the grey lines between right and wrong. Saima Mir is an award-winning journalist and writer. She has written for The Guardian, The Times, The Independent, and the Daily Telegraph, and worked for the BBC. Her work appeared in the anthology It's Not About the Burqa in 2019 and The Best Most Awful Job in 2020. Her first novel, The Khan, was published in January 2021 and has been optioned by BBC Studios. Vengeance, its sequel, is out in June 2024. Saima is a recipient of the Commonwealth Broadcast Association Worldview Award and the K. Blundell Trust Award. Saima's work has been longlisted for the SI Leeds Literary Prize and the Bath Novel Award. Her screenplay, Ruby and Matt, has been optioned by Rendition Films. I'm so glad that Saima's my guest today. Hello, Saima. Welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf podcast. It's so wonderful to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So you are the author of The Khan, the infamous Khan, which is a novel based on this organised crime syndicate in the north of England, and we meet our wonderful character of Jia Khan. And the sequel, Vengeance, is coming out in the world in early June, which is hopefully what we'll be talking about today. And it is just absolutely amazing. So I want to know where it all started for you. Why did you decide to write a book about crime and this sort of underworld and this organized crime syndicate that is taking place in your novels?
I really love to read because I find it entertaining. I'm not one of these fantastic readers who reads and intellectualizes everything. I just read because it's fun. It's the same as watching Netflix for me, and I have done since I was a really small child. And so I wanted to read a story which had the kind of women in who I knew. And by that, I don't mean criminals, like really smart, savvy, clever, beautiful Muslim women, and who were of Pakistani heritage. And I just couldn't see that anywhere. And I love crime stories. So I liked The Godfather a lot. And when I watched The Godfather, it reminded me so much of family, like a really big, old, desi family. And so much of that film for me wasn't about them as being criminals. It was about the intersections between family and how fathers and sons and this kind of stuff. And so I wanted to write a story with this really kick-ass Muslim woman, which was the opposite of what I was seeing in media that was portrayed. Every Muslim woman I knew was just really fantastically strong. And I thought, what if I took a crime novel and just turned it on its head and did something that surprised the majority of readers in this country? And that's where The Khan came from.
Yeah, I find that so interesting because I feel like when we become so frustrated with the representation that we see of Muslim women, which is often like oppressed and quiet and unable to live the life that she wants to live and not intelligent and not funny and not interesting, I guess the instinct is then to create this absolutely amazing woman who is doing everything that society wants her to do. And she is quote unquote good. So she is successful in her career, but she's kind. She's a law-abiding citizen. She's not breaking any laws. She's really good to her family. She doesn't have any sort of a grey. There's no greyness to her character. But you've taken that and put it on its head almost and shown us that being good or being empowered doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be morally upstanding at all times. And sometimes your circumstances, your situation, your family, whatever it may be, puts you in situations where you need to do things that are morally grey or wrong in some ways. There are some things that are probably you shouldn't question whether or not they're right or wrong. And I really like that. I really like that sort of looking at that differently.
So one of the things I experienced when I was very young, I was divorced really early, and I always thought I'd lived this really exactly the kind of woman you've described. I thought I was her. And yet when I did this one thing of speaking the truth and saying, I don't want to live in this situation, suddenly I was maligned and there was a lot of judgment placed upon me. So who I thought I was and who I was portrayed to be by other people really shocked me. And I loved the idea of putting that on this woman. So no matter what we do, we can change the way people see us, can we? They bring their own lens to us. And so I thought, this woman is just going to do exactly what she pleases and not care about the fact that people are judging her. And somehow, though, she thinks she's right. Somehow she thinks everything she is doing is morally upright and the absolute right thing to do. And she's making a difference to people's lives. And I love that. I love the nuance and the grey of people, because I don't know anybody who lives in the black and white. We all have shades of grey within us. And some people have more shades of grey than others. And so I just wanted to extrapolate that and make her this woman who was the opposite of, she's had enough, basically. She's had enough of trying to toe the line and do what everybody else says. And as far as she's concerned, it's just between her and her maker. And that's it. And she does some bad things.
Yeah. And this in Vengeance, I feel like we see that almost like duality like more clearly. And so there's a lot of times when obviously know that what they're doing, there's been harm done, or there's someone's lost their life or been killed or whatever, something bad's happened. But at the same time, we see Jia really struggling with how can we help people? How can we get people out of living in this absolute squalor? We can't shut down our operations because so many people rely on us for a source of income. We're doing so much for the city. Really interesting sort of duality of like good and bad and right and wrong existing at the same time, and how one, I guess, can somehow justify or uphold the other.
Yeah.
And there's a really interesting line that comes up in Vengeance where one of the characters says, the greyest lines are the easiest to cross. And I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it because it's so true. Like when we think in black and white and we think in binaries, we know this is the line and we shouldn't cross it because it's a black line or it's a red line. But when it's grey, there's no rules about what to do about it, and you don't know how to read that. And yeah, I just wondered if you could unpack that a little bit, that idea of when there is a grey line or when something is so grey, who is to decide what should happen?
I don't know. That's the thing, isn't it? One of the great things about writing fiction is you don't have to have all the answers and you can make your characters question things. And Islam is quite black and white in a lot of things, isn't it? Not in everything. I think there's a lot of ease in there. In fact, it is a religion of ease. That's what we're taught. And we as people have made this is black and this is white. And I understand to a point why we do that when we're children, because you don't, for example, things like you don't tell a lie. As a child, you're taught you don't tell a lie. And then as an adult, people become, oh, we have degrees of lying. This is a white lie and this is a... And if you go down that path of this is a white lie, then it does become easier to eventually do that other thing. And it's a slippery slope of life, isn't it? And I know that from when I was 19, 20 and the way I lived and the way I live now. And I'm not sure which is right, but somehow my mind decides to justify all my actions and all my behaviors and tell me that I'm okay, I'm doing the right thing. But I know that 21-year-old me would be like, Saima, you've completely lost the plot here. You're doing some things that are not acceptable. But somehow life has worn away the edges of things, and very much like Jia Khan, and not in a criminal kingpin kind of way at all. But you make decisions for survival, and suddenly you have responsibilities for other people, children, for husbands, for in-laws, for siblings. And none of those decisions that you made for yourself, you would make for yourself, you can make for them. And so it's an exploration of that. And also, I do think, so one of the things I really thought when I was young was that Islam is just black and white, and we just come into it clean and we leave clean. And then as I got older and the more I read and the more I lived, I saw actually this is the dunya, this is the world, this is not the afterlife. And this is the test. And we are going to get skirmished, and we are going to get mud on us as we walk through the world. And it's that constant balancing of the equation of good and bad, the different angels on the shoulders. I think that's fascinating. And I don't have any answers, but what I do have is a lot of questions, and I try and put those into my stories.
Yeah. I find it so fascinating the way that you explored it, because I guess we all have that in our own lives about things that we perceive to be, and just understanding or having the courage sometimes as well to decide what to do, but also sometimes the things that you are forced to do for your own survival and for those around you. And I guess one of the quotes from the Khan that was widely shared and loved by everyone is this idea that you said, be twice as good as men and 4 times as good as white men. And I wondered if you could talk about that quote a little bit. Tell us where that came from and what of your own experiences really feed into that.
So my whole life, I think, feeds into that. So one of the things I found was that I was quite naive and innocent in life, and I'm doing the right thing and everybody else is doing the right thing too. We're just going through life. And then I realized that when people view me, they view me through the lens of my skin color. They view me through the lens of my chosen faith. They view me through my Arabic name. They view me through the fact that my parents came here from Pakistan. And when they look at me through those lenses, everything about me diminishes in their view. And so when I walk into a room, if I make a mistake, I'm held to a much higher standard. And unfortunately, that was my experience of life. And so what I did was I realized that I had to work much harder than my equivalent counterparts. And the system was set up that way. And I think most people around that time didn't even understand the biases they had. I'd like to say it's different now, and at least we're more aware of things. We talk about privilege, and we talk about bias, and we talk about our prejudices. And so for me, and it's a thing I've had to remind myself of when I feel I've not hit a mark, is that for me to be in a room, to be in a job at the BBC, or for me to be in a publishing meeting, was harder because I had to crack open those doors. There were doors somewhere that weren't open. There were doors that had been opened by other women, other Muslim women, other brown faces. And that was fantastic. For some of us, there was nothing. There was no path. We had to get our spade and dig and cut stuff down. And we did have to be better. And it's unfortunate. I think we still do have to be better. And I think until we dismantle those structures that see us through those lenses, we will have to be better. It's really to me.
Yeah, I think the reason why it was like so widely shared and loved was because it resonates, I think, with so many people. It is such a real lived experience. There's no actual law or like quota or I don't know, rule that stops women like you and me from getting into certain places, getting into certain universities or certain jobs. But it's the idea that like access is so narrow. And like you said, like we have to work so much harder to get to the same position. And I think that is not understood enough. It seems to be a celebration when there's women of color at the top of any industry or at the best universities, but not a real understanding of what it's taken for them to get there.
You lose parts of yourself along the way. You do lose parts of yourself. And you do, and I think you compromise things that you never thought you would compromise. And it's, like I said, it's the gray. You're slipping into the gray and you're trying to understand it and justify it. And if you've got bills to pay and you've got children to feed, you're slowly doing that. One thing I really wanted to write about in both Fran and The Vengeance was there's so much judgment placed on women for the decisions we make. And actually, what we need is more help. What we need is support and understanding. We don't need judgment. I don't think any woman goes into one of the things the Khan opens with the scene of a woman she's a prostitute. And I really wanted to show that woman, she's not some woman who's just woken up and decided, I'm going to do this for a living. Things happen to people and it's a slow erosion of their life. And who would make that choice if other choices were available to them? But like you said, the doorways are so narrow for us to fit through. When you apply to university, when I applied to university, God, over 30 years ago, and you filled out this UCAS form, and were you doing these extracurricular activities? I wasn't doing any extracurricular. I was going to school, I was going home, I was offering my namaz, and I was sitting down, I was watching TV, and I was doing my homework. And I was really good. I was doing my homework. My parents didn't come from the background where we went horse riding or we played tennis. And even if I did decide to play tennis, the way that my attire was not that of someone who would be playing tennis on the tennis court, and convincing my parents that this is what I need to do, or even justifying it to myself. I would never put on a small skirt and go play tennis. And that's not shade or judgment on anyone who would. It was just the way I was raised. So for me, even if I made that decision, that movement from point A to point where I do go on that tennis court was vast. It was a thing that I wasn't able to cross along with everything else. But that box that I was supposed to fit in, that was supposed to get me into them certain universities, wanted me to do extracurricular activity with a lack of understanding of that not everybody comes from that world. And I do speak multiple languages and I can quote all kinds of poetry and I can do all kinds of extracurricular things. You just don't fit that white Western mold of what that is. And it's hard. It wears you down, doesn't it? It makes you tired.
Yeah, it makes you tired. And that's the thing that I think now that I'm in my 30s and I'm already feeling like, gosh, I feel so tired. And it's not that I'm getting good sleep or whatever. It is that I know I have been working so hard from when I was like I started school, because I always felt like I need to do well and I need to work harder to stand out. And to, even if my grades, and I think especially when you apply for university, you hear this, that, oh, there's going to be thousands of people applying with the exact same grades as you, even if you're at the top. The exact same grades as you have to stand out. But when you come from like a culture, but also like financial constraints where you can't afford private tennis lessons or swimming lessons or to go skiing or whatever it is that people do, you're just out there, okay, but how do I stand out in a way that you're going to understand that I'm amazing as I am?
And also, exactly, I was never taught because I wore hijab when I was 20 onwards to when I was, I think I was about 23. And it was a thing I loved and it was a thing I thought was really beautiful and it was a thing I really wanted to do. I don't think I had the understanding of how people perceive me when I was walking with that on. And it's not a thing that we ever talk about because sometimes I think we feel it's disrespectful. So it's something we're wearing, but I think we need to talk about it because it adds to the respect of what those women are doing and what those women are wearing. Because there are people, the minute you walk into a room with your head covered, who make the assumption that you're oppressed or that you have been forced to do this, or somehow your brain is less than the woman whose hair is uncovered. And that then pits us against each other, even as Muslim women. And again, it's that division of who we are and what we are. And this is a good Muslim woman and this is a bad Muslim woman. And I wanted to talk about all of that in the Quran and in Vengeance and in all our lives. It just colors everything. And that goes into that be 4 times as good as a white man, because a white guy just has a shower and goes. As a woman, we have to do our makeup, we have to do our hair, we have to wear nice clothes, we have to be forthright, but not too forthright. We have to be uncovered, but not too uncovered. We have to be able to do all these things and navigate them and do the job that he does, but at a better level, and then not be married and not have a baby, because then that would be take us away from our work and carry that stuff. And it's exhausting. It's just so exhausting.
Absolutely. And you do actually in Vengeance, there's this bit which I laughed out loud because Jia said, "Oh, that woman, that person expected me to speak with an Urdu accent. But when she hears the way that I speak and hears the name of the university that I went to, suddenly everything changes and they realize who they're dealing with." And I find that a lot because all the time I'll be wearing a kurta when I go out because it's comfortable and it's loose and I like it. And I know, and I wear hijab, and I know that sometimes from the way that people speak to me and the way that they look at me, until I've spoken, they think I can't speak
Yes.
English. And it frustrates me that there's nothing wrong with it if I couldn't speak
Yeah.
English. But the fact is that they've made the assumption based on how they think I look.
And that,
Which, yeah, it's
yeah,
just,
and that assumption is tiring. And it's easy to say, oh, it's assumption, brush it off. But over and over again, it is exhausting. Someone said to me something back, when we talk about integrating, it has the word grates in it. It grates at me that I have to, that people look at you. And do they do this thing with you? They do this thing with me sometimes where I'm speaking English and I'm getting very clipped in my accent and I'm speaking very quickly and very properly. And then they're like, their eyes, it's almost like they're going in and out of focus because their brain cannot compute how my face is speaking English at this level. But I don't understand, but I don't understand. And it's so tiring. Leave us alone. We don't just speak English. We speak a few other languages as well, some of us. So you only speak English. We speak this very well. We write in it, work in it, and we speak a few others too.
Really intrigued to know how you developed your understanding of this world where this organized crime syndicate is taking place in the north of Bradford in your book, in the north of England in your book. You don't actually specify that it's Bradford. I just made the assumption.
A lot of people make that assumption, and it's because I grew up in Bradford and I love that city.
Yeah.
And I worked there. So I was a trainee reporter at the Telegraph and Argus, which is a newspaper in Bradford. And I started out there. I was a cover reporter and I covered a lot of things. And one of the things I covered was crime. And when I covered crime, I was the only non-white reporter in that newsroom when I started out. And so you can imagine Bradford has a large South Asian contingent. It has a large Pakistani community. I speak the language. I grew up there. I went to school there. I went to university there. And so I had access to things that other people didn't have. And people trusted me in ways that they didn't trust other reporters. Partly also because I could navigate the cultural differences and I could speak the languages and I could speak to somebody in Urdu or in Punjabi, or I could understand enough Mifuri to get by. And I would hear these amazing stories about stuff that was going on. One of the things I used to do was there was a place in Bradford called Cafe Lahore, which I think is now called the British Asian Kitchen. And I used to hang out there. It had just opened and the guy who'd set it up, he used to have curry and then after that school dinner puddings. And it was a place when desserts had just become the thing. And it just started out before it was like it is now. And it was where you went if you didn't drink. So if you didn't drink, where would you go on an evening? When I was on late shift, used to go there. We used to hang out there. And I'd take my mobile phones from work. I was on a shift. I would finish at about 11. Everybody would leave the office about 5. And I would take my phones and I'd hang out. You've got to call the police every hour in the fire and you've got to find out what's going on. And you're supposed to find stories. And so I would just hear some amazing stuff when I was there. People would come in and tell me stuff and I'd hear these urban myths. You meet a lot of interesting people. When you're in court, drug dealers and people who are up for crimes. And that's where a lot of this came from, covering the stories, hearing things that other people didn't hear, having someone come up to me and go, listen, I'm going to tell you this story. This is what's really going down in this city. That's where a lot of that research came.
It's absolutely fascinating because it's actually so complex in both The Han and Vengeance. There's so many different things going on. Some of them are interlinked, but some of them not. It's just this very intense and vast web of things going on that seemingly has one person at the head of it, Akbar Khan in The Han and then Jia Khan later on in Vengeance. And it just, it's phenomenal actually to think that something, it's like a group of people that are managing to control and influence and impact so much. And obviously there's issues with that. There's people being taken advantage of, there's money laundering and crime and all kinds of stuff going on. But it is also just absolutely fascinating. And I love what you said earlier about the family aspect of it, and how actually like our families operate in a very similar way, and that like they're all very interconnected, very vast, lots of power struggles, lots of strange and interesting dynamics. But how the idea of having family at the heart of something like this, rather than business, rather than just like business partners, I think also changes things. And you have spoken also about what the extent that you would go for people that you love. What do you think, really, having this being like a family business rather than just like one person doing it in secret, what that does to the thing itself?
I think it makes it a lot more interesting. It's so much more complex, isn't it? Because it adds so much more emotion to it. People always say it's business, it's not personal. This is all personal. And also, our families share our secrets and they know where our metaphorical bodies are buried, as well as, in this case, the actual physical body. And it's really hard to separate oneself from the people that we have once loved. And I love writing about that. There's a real grief, isn't there, about when we lose people that we loved. And as you change and you grow, you do lose people. Also, there's this thing I've heard a lot growing up about we shouldn't cut the ties of the womb, the ties of kinship, ties of the womb. And it's a really big Islamic thing that people are told. And I feel like we're bound in it from childhood. All these relationships, or paradise lies at the feet of our mother, or respect we owe our mother's sisters. And I've just thought it was a really interesting thing to play with. I just think family, everybody has some kind of family, whether it's actually blood family or the family that they've chosen. So it just makes everything more complicated and more interesting and more texturized. And it's really great because you can't really lose them. Even if you don't see them again, if you catch up with them 10 years from now, you're still back where you started because you had history. You shared some kind of relative or some kind of, maybe you shared a womb. You had Christmas dinner together. You had Eid dinner together. You might have had lunches together. You hated the same people when you were kids. Also, the other thing which I think is really interesting about family is you may have had the same upbringing and known the same people and experienced them completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you've written the character of Jia, and I think she's a very fascinating character, but she hasn't landed that well with some of your readers, maybe a lot of your readers. I think they have found Jia to be just, and I can understand it because she's a very standoffish character, but that I feel like is kind of how she has to be. But she, although is the protagonist, is still quite closed. I feel like we see more of her thoughts and her feelings in Vengeance than we did in The Hun, which makes sense in terms of the story that you're telling. But there is still something about her that is very, I don't know, very closed, she is atypical in lots of ways, especially in herself as a mother. And I think that sort of filters through in different ways as how she presents herself and how she interacts with those around her. But why did you decide to have this character that was still quite closed, that you probably knew people wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards or wouldn't be able to love her because she's not warm and she doesn't invite it. There's nobody really in her life that she lets in on that level. There is a closeness with Idris and Nadim, but even then it's still measured. So what was it like for you deciding to make her like that?
Yes. So, when I wrote Jia Khan, I didn't want to write her as cold. I wrote her as being really controlled. And I wrote her as a woman who was really deeply hurt and deeply damaged by what had happened to her. And it's interesting when you send a book out there, how people respond, because they don't know any of the backstory that's in your head. And I was really surprised when people found her cold, because I wrote her as a woman who, to me, deeply feels everything, but is so controlled in what she reveals to other people that they don't realize how deeply she feels. And for me, all of her actions are steeped in the fact that she's a deeply sensitive, deep feeling woman who takes on this empire because it's like, if I don't do it, this is going to happen. What she does to her son that's revealed at the end of the Khan is because she just can't cope. So I tried to write her as that. But the thing about likable, people not liking her is, as a woman, it doesn't take much to not be liked. And I find that the worst thing you can do as a woman is tell the truth. You can commit any crime and you're forgiven, or whatever you consider to be a sin, and it's all forgivable. But if you challenge the status quo and if you speak your truth, then people don't like it. And I've been the villain quite a lot in my life without meaning to be. And I always thought I was quite a nice, gentle woman. And I realized I was completely villainized for speaking the truth. And it's all Saima. She's at it again. She's telling those things. She's saying this thing. And so I was okay with writing somebody who was a villain because she's not a villain to herself. She actually thinks she's one of the good guys.
It's really interesting, even in the way that I asked you that question, because one of the things I said was that she's not very warm. And I feel like this is a product of the society that we live in that we expect women to be soft and to be forthcoming. And when they're not, we immediately feel, and I say we, and I just feel like everybody, we feel like that there's something not right, or that person is not nice, and it's again this idea that like women should be forthcoming and women should be open and polite and kind and control their rage and control their feelings. And the minute they're not, they're othered and they're isolated and they become, as you said, like they're villainized, even if they haven't done anything villain-like.
We're villainized, right? And I have what my husband calls a resting bitch face. I'm also a massive introvert and I get my social battery drains really quickly. And what I've experienced in my life is that if I'm really tired, and I'm also, as a writer, you're thinking about a million things and everything is a story. And somebody was joking with me the other day, that conversation with you run off with your notebook, you're writing notes. But it's true, I do. And so I'm the center of my life. And what happens is that when I zone out or I'm tired, people can assume that I'm being a bitch or what am I thinking? I'm being rude, and I'm not. And it is exactly that. Whereas women, we have to be on all the time. We have to be, hi, how are you? How's everything going? And I hate that. I hate people who do that. I don't want anyone to do that to me. I'd rather someone say, you know what, I'm really tired and I really need to leave right now. And I'm so fine with that. And so that's how I wrote her. And it was interesting because people did say, oh God, I don't like her. She's so awful. And with Lafan, it really deeply cut me because I think I did see so much of myself in Jia Khan's strange behavior. And when I wrote Vengeance, there were chapters that I was writing where I thought, oh my God, you are awful, Jia Khan. What are you doing? This is just awful. And that was the moment where she and I split, I think, into two separate people.
Yeah, we know that you are not a criminal queen pin, but I definitely, like in Vengeance, we see so much more of her. We understand, I think, a little bit more about how she feels, what she thinks, where some of her decisions come from. But she's still reserved, I would say, even to the reader, even in these like private thoughts. But I guess at this point, she's in her 40s. She's had to be this way her entire life, and she was estranged from her family for so many years. I think if we really try and get into her head, I'm sure we can maybe not sympathize or excuse or justify some of the things that she does, because there are some awful things that she does, but at least understand where she's coming from.
Traumatized, isn't she, by her life? Yeah. She lost her brother.
Yeah.
You don't do the things that she does if you're a healthy, balanced, functioning individual. He's massively damaged. And She's damaged by what happened to her experiences, but she's also damaged by society. She's also damaged by what she's seen in the law. She's set out. Was a really naive woman who was very protected and thought that everything was going to be okay. And she's just not handled that stuff well. And her dad's a criminal.
I mean, I think the overwhelming thing I have felt for Jia in both of your books actually is that she's so lonely. There are so many people in her life, but she doesn't have friends. She doesn't have anyone that she can really confide in. She doesn't know who she can trust. And even like with her husband, she's constantly hiding things from him, trying to protect him, trying to protect her children, not understanding one another. And I have overwhelmingly felt in both of your books that this is just so sad. Like, to be a woman and be so successful in every definition and every understanding of the word, but just be so lonely. And I think there must be, and there are so many women experiencing that kind of loneliness and like isolation and alienation from themselves and from other people. And that's really sad. And I wish that we had more space to talk about that and to support one another.
Yes, you've absolutely nailed it. She is. She doesn't have anybody. She's incredibly lonely. She's carrying the weight and everything. Yeah, and I think there are. And it's about us. The thing is, with her, obviously, she can't go tell anyone because they're going to put her in prison. But for the rest of us, there needs to be space for us to be vulnerable and for us to say, this is where I made a mistake, or this is where I went wrong, or this is what happened to me. And then that's the only way we end our loneliness. But you've absolutely nailed it. That's exactly how.
Yeah. One of the things that I also really enjoyed in Vengeance is that you give us a little bit of Akbar Khan's backstory, him arriving in the UK in the 1970s from Pakistan with his brother. What were you really trying to explore and bring out about giving that backstory? Because it added a little bit to the plot in that, like, we found a connection to one of the characters, but it didn't add that much to the plot you were moving forward. But what were you hoping to bring out by giving us his backstory?
This guy was not a baddie from the start. He didn't come to this country to commit crime and to do bad things. And most people who do that, that's not what happens. When you come to a new country, you're an idealist, you're a dreamer. And survival happens. And also, the other thing I really wanted to explore was the idea that people do not become villains in isolation. Society contributes to the things that we become. And it's one of the things I saw as a reporter as well, was when I'd cover stories about crimes and criminals and terrorism and things and rioting. This is not a vacuum. People don't do this. When a baby is born, that baby doesn't come with an imprint of, I am going to be a criminal kingpin of the empire. And so I really wanted to write about that. And also a story about those men who came here in the 70s and how dapper they were and how passionate they were and how young they were and how they were treated when they came to a country that had called them, but then didn't embrace them. And I wanted to tell that story about and what London was like and how it would be to be a young man on your own, suddenly having arrived in this foreign land with these big dreams.
Yeah. I really enjoyed reading it because it's true, the character that comes in 1974 in your book was so different to who the Khan ended up being. And it's actually like very, very sweet. Like he's making sure that the meat he's eating is halal because his faith means so much to him. Then he's talking about his brother and he's looking after his brother and his family. And it is very value driven and very sweet. And I think we can understand, or we do understand once we read it, what happened and how it was never intended. And actually when it first comes to him as an idea to do something illegal, he says no. He's no, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And I think then he's somewhat forced in some ways to do what he did and then what it led to. And obviously it's not that black and white. There were many choices and decisions along the way in the way that it grew. But I thought it was a really interesting backstory. And I like generally reading about the experience of that the generation that came in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s, because they came to such a different country as well. And they came with such hopes. And as you said, like, so many of them were somewhat invited or called, or in some ways they lost their homes and were forced to come, because when the Mangla Dam was built and everything was submerged underwater in Meadford. So I think, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think it is nice in general as well. It adds different multiple layers. And then we do see Jia and some of the other characters throughout the book battle with their conscience, especially around murder and around the implications of having certain people removed from the system. I'm just interested in how you went about exploring that and what particular things you wanted to bring out about that.
I wanted to bring out the fact that not people aren't all bad or all good, and they do things, and they have to live with the consequences of that. And so they had got caught up in this thing that they'd done in the start of book one. And actually, it was really black and white to them. They were just going to kill this guy and they were going to take it out and they were going to take over and it was all going to be fine. It's never like that, is it, in life? The man they killed in the first book was bad, but he was also good to some other people. They wanted to explore that. We also wanted to explore the fact that people are surviving. Sorry, I know I keep saying this, but a lot of the themes of Bafan are about survival. And also, we just decide what's good and what's bad and what's legally acceptable and what's not. We just pull things from the air, don't we? And actually, it doesn't work for everybody. There's a line in one, I think it's in Vengeance, which is about some people don't work with a democracy, they need a dictatorship. And while I'm not saying that's true for everybody, I think everybody's different and we need to have a system that's kinder than that kind of understanding. And I just like the idea of exploring this thing. They've killed these people. In films, you might watch Peaky Blinders, they kill somebody, but they don't ever think about it. They just carry on. Maybe from a shelter, you might think about it quite a bit, but it's just what they're doing. But you live with that. It marks your soul, doesn't it? And I really wanted to explore Naveen, who's this artist, an actor, supposed to be a deep thinker. How is he living with this idea? He's done this. He's taken someone's life.
I did. I found it really interesting because I think because I guess we're so obsessed in thinking with binaries, or so I guess programmed to think in terms of black and white. It's very easy to just think that somebody who is caught up in a life of crime is okay with it and has accepted it and doesn't feel it and doesn't have a conscience about it. But actually, if we know, or if we really understand that in some cases, or in a lot of cases, they're caught up in this way because of circumstance and in order to survive, then it's not being a choice. And when something is forced upon you like that, you haven't decided that you're okay with this. It's just what you end up having to do.
Yeah, so like the smaller choices of life, which are far from murder, things like divorce. Well, I have experience of being divorced. Or if you have somebody who's hurt you and you've stepped away from them, it's never as clear cut and as easy as we'd like to believe. We might see people walking around and being, oh, they're absolutely fine. Look, they've done that thing and they're fine. They're just carrying on. But actually the residue of that stays with you, and it stays with you for a long time. And that's something quite minor in that world. But if you've killed somebody, if you've taken a life, if you've committed some criminal activity, the residue of that marks you and it stays with you and it stays in your mind to the point where you think about how I have stress around my email inbox. I wake up thinking, I've got an inbox. So if I'm stressed about that, these people are going to be highly stressed about things that they've done, unless they're psychopaths, and that's a completely different category. And a lot of the characters in Khan and Vengeance are not psychopaths. They're ordinary people in extraordinarily bad situations, doing extraordinarily bad things. And I think that we read these stories, it just gives us pause when people do things that we don't like. We think, hang on, what's happening here? Why are they doing it? and how they're going to feel about it afterwards, and ourselves too. If I do this bad thing, I'm gonna think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. When writing the books, what has been your favorite thing or your favorite character or your favorite thing to explore?
I love writing the relationship between Jia Khan and Ilyas because I just don't understand it. And I love the fact that he loves her, but also what's wrong with him? Like, why is he with this woman? So I love that. And I love figuring out how they argue and what makes them stick together, what makes him be with her, and what makes her be with him. I also really love the aspect of the cryptocurrency. How can I come up with a new crime? What's going on? How really rich people hide money. I've got quite a lot of books here about serious money. I really love these stories around the uber rich. And you mentioned earlier about how there can be one person at the head of this thing. So I love podcasts. So there's a podcast at the FT called Hot Money. And one of them actually talks about this international cabal that runs the entire world of crime. So I love that too.
You have left a little bit of an opening for a further plot and more stories. Will there be another book?
There will be one more book of just deal by my publishers. So there will be one last file. I think as far as I'm concerned, there'll be one last file on that bit. And then I'm hoping that will be just the close of it. It'd be nice to have a trilogy, 3 of them together.
Yeah. There definitely feels like that there needs to be at least one more Han. And just as we finish today.
Sorry, I was just saying, what do you think should happen in it? You've asked me lots of questions.
I think that that Jia Khan has a sibling that she needs to meet. And I think that sibling is going to come and right all the wrongs. I think Ahad, I really like the character of Ahad. I think he is so loved, but misunderstood by his mother. Very sweet and also very innocent. And I think he needs to understand the world a bit better and then decide what he wants to do.
I like that. I might steal that one.
That's what I would like. That's what I would like to see. But thank you. As we wrap up, what do you really hope for anyone that picks up the Vengeance or even the Han? What do you hope they take away from
I hope they're really entertained. I hope that when they read them, they come away thinking, it was just so much fun to read. That's all I hope for, that they just are entertained for a few hours. And they're gripped by it and they think, yeah, that was a good read.
Oh, I'm sure they will be, and I hope the same for you. But Saima, thank you so much for your time today. It's been so wonderful speaking to you.